Welcome to Witch Hunt. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
And I'm Sarah Jack. Today's episode explores Salem witch trial tourism and history with a very special guest.
We're excited to welcome Antonio Infante, a Salem witch trials historic tour guide and author. Antonio brings a unique perspective to our ongoing examination of witch hunt history.
Antonio not only guides visitors through the streets of Salem, but he's also actively involved in efforts to bring justice and recognition to all victims of witch hunts in Massachusetts.
In this episode, we'll hear about Antonio's personal connection to the trials, his experiences as a tour guide, and get a sneak peek at his book about Sarah Cloyce, a lesser-known figure in the Salem story.
We'll also discuss the broader context of witch trials in Massachusetts and the ongoing efforts to memorialize and seek justice for all those accused.
Let's begin.
Hi, Antonio. It's great to have you here today. Thank you for all your volunteer work, your commitment to your local history, and the important contributions you've already made to this podcast.
I'm more than happy to be here. Very excited. It's my first time doing something like this, so very happy to be here.
Please tell the audience a little about yourself.
My name is Antonio Infante. I am a resident of Massachusetts since I was about 8 years old. I do a lot with the witch trials. I work at the Rebecca Nurse Homestead, and I also do walking tours, which is why I'm here today. I'm also soon to be published first-time author within the next 5 days. Very exciting. But yeah.
Exciting. Can you tell us what inspired you to become a Salem Witch Trials historic tour guide?
Oh, okay. I think what probably had to inspire me was when I was younger, I always just had a thing for things that were witches and stuff like that, I guess you could say. But as I got older, I started to learn more about what was going on behind the scenes and stuff like that. I remember being younger and always watching The Wizard of Oz with my great grandmother. And eventually I moved up here and I learned that there was a whole witch city. And I was like, oh, okay, that's really cool. And I was like 9 at the time. I went there and my mom and I remember we went to go see Cry Innocent. And I didn't know what the heck was going on at the time. I just thought it was really, really cool. I remember she was let go and I was really confused as to why she was let go. And then it kind of just subsided. I really, obviously, for sure, as a lot of people listen, I loved Hocus Pocus. That was probably my biggest thing. And I remember that was always in the background as I was growing up. It was always a back and forth between other things. But I've always primarily been interested in witches and stuff like that. And then eventually I got into genealogy and I was doing research of my family history. And I never expected it because my family is all Pennsylvania Dutch, German. On my mom's side, my dad's side is Puerto Rican and Dominican. So I didn't really expect to find anything. I knew I'd find English, but English settlers that landed in Pennsylvania. And then eventually, though, through one branch of my family that made its way all the way back to Boston, I learned that one of my ancestors was accused of during the Salem witch trials. Unfortunately, there is not much out there about her. She was about 70 years old at her accusation. Her name was Susanna Roots, and she was from Beverly. Her neighbor was the infamous Dorcas Hoare, and she just disappears from the historical record after her arrest. Presumed either she died in jail or she was released. We don't know what happened to her, but that really fed it. And I learned more, and I went to the Rebecca Nurse Homestead on August 19th, 2022. I get a reminder every year on Facebook. And I read the Day by Day Chronicle by Marilyn Roach, and it was just from there on. And I started talking. I met Candace Dawes and Catherine Rotowski, the curator and shop manager at the homestead. And I was so heavily involved there. And then Catherine, who's the curator there, also works for Essex Heritage, which is a nonprofit organization and does a lot of stuff with history in Essex County as a whole. Eventually, she's like, hey, I need tour guides for my walking tour in Salem. I was like, oh, okay, cool. What's your tour about? And she's basically it's a myths and misconceptions tour about the Salem witch trials. And me personally, I love teaching people. I work in education. I work primarily elementary. And also, I like to dispel the myths about the witch trials because it's my second favorite hobby. Being like, oh no, that's actually not what happened. And eventually, and I've been doing it since early June of this year. But I would say I've been doing witch trials as a part-time job for the last 2 years.
Before we jump into more tour talk,
Mhm.
I have to know, do you wear any of your custom costumes that you design as a tour guide?
Unfortunately, no. I wear my standard blue polo that says Essex Heritage on it. I would love to. Unfortunately, though, then I fear I would get lumped in with the other tourism family.
Oh,
We try to
yeah.
stay very professional. Maybe someday. I've had the thought of doing a Bridget Bishop tour in Salem where I just talk about Bridget since she lived there and a lot of her accusers all lived within a block of where she lived. I've had the idea. I don't know if I'll ever do it, but I've thought about it.
And you mentioned Hocus Pocus. I see the Sanderson sisters behind you. Do
Oh
you have
yeah.
a do you have a favorite sister?
Oof. Like asking me to pick my favorite child.
Oh yeah.
But it depends on the day of the week. Usually Winifred, sometimes Sarah, sometimes Mary. But especially when it's me and my two best friends. One of them is my roommate, and we all kind of bicker like the Sanderson sisters. So it's really hard to say which was who. But I don't know. Probably Winifred on any given day.
Can you tell us about the sites or landmarks in Salem that are particularly significant to the witch trial history?
Well, so the ones that I think are probably the most important, besides Doctor's Ledge, depending on who you ask, you still get debate to this day as to whether or not if it's the spot. I mean, I've been attacked for my opinion on it. I say it's the area. It's the memorial's in the best spot. I will say I always will say that the memorial's in the best spot, most accessible spot. That is one of the most important spots in Salem. The second I would have to say is the Charter Street Memorial, where you have the 20 names of the 20 of the 25 victims. I always clarify that on my tour because people are like, oh, is this everyone? I'm like, oh, no, there's still five more. They just don't have any. But I very much would love a memorial to all 150 people who were accused. That's grasping for straws. I don't know if that will ever happen. Maybe someday. And I would also say, even though it's not really important to the general people who are interested in the witch trials, but I honestly have to say the location of where Bridget Bishop lived because it's such a walked, heavily trafficked through spot. And also, just outside of where it is in the center of the street is where the courthouse was in 1692. And a lot of people don't know that it was that close to everything. Honestly, the whole area of Washington Street and Essex Street has so many important sites. There's Bridget's house. There's where the courthouse was. There's where the Reverend Noyes lived, just across the street from Bridget Bishop, which a lot of people don't know. And then just down the street, though, is where Rockefeller's is, the restaurant. That is where the original Salem Town Meeting House was, where Sarah Cloyce was and Elizabeth Proctor were questioned. And I would have to say, though, probably the Charter Street Memorial because it's the most visited. I actually know a lot of traffic through that area on my tours, but definitely Charter Street.
Can you talk to us about what a typical tour entails? What are some of the key locations that you visit on your tours?
So the tour is about half a mile. It's about an hour long. I'm very punctual, so I get back to we start from the visitor center and we end at the visitor center. I'm back with them before the hour. Usually we try to let guests know that a purchase of their ticket for the walking tour includes admission in with the Salem Witch Hunt Examine the Evidence documentary, which is played at the visitor center, which is a great start because our tour is not necessarily a narrative tour because we're just here to like dispel myths and misconceptions. There is a little bit of in the beginning, this is what happened, and then by the end, this is what happened. But we don't go in the beginning, it was Titcher Butt. But generally, though, we start at the visitor center, and I'm going to try not to give too much away because I don't want to like spoil it for people who are on the tour. But it's always very general misconceptions that I myth busts at the beginning. And then we leave and we go to the Charter Street Memorial. And there, that is the significant bulk of the tour. And I'll go more into that a little bit later. And then from there, we go past the where Sophia Hawthorne lived, suppose, and then we go up past the one obligatory Hocus Pocus film location because it's always a question as to whether or not is where the old town hall is. Because everyone's like, did they film a scene here? I'm like, just the outside. Like, that's what, because my boss was like, she's like, you don't have to tell people that. She's like, but if you want to, you can. Because every time if I don't, I always get that question. So I always cover it on my tour. And then we go past Bridget's and I tell Bridget's story because I know it like the back of my hand. Hers and Rebecca Nurse's and Sarah Cloyce's, those are the three stories I can tell you like the back of my hand. And then we go past the jail and we go back to the visitor center.
It sounds like your respect for the victims is your priority and your historical accuracy, but you do throw a little entertainment information in there for people.
I try to, because honestly, I always say during my tour, because a lot of the misconceptions try to give the witch trials a happy ending, especially when it's like, oh, the governor ended the witch trials because his wife was accused because he loved her so much. And I'm like, she wasn't necessarily ever accused. She was probably named. And then they go, or when they talk about a Mary Estes petition, which is very poignant, but everyone's like, oh, well, the governor read it and he was just so moved by it. I'm like, the governor unfortunately didn't really care. I always equate the end of the witch trials to when a boss gets a bad review from his boss. So he has to try to fix it. And unfortunately, that's what the end of the witch trials is in my eyes. Sure, there are probably going to be many historians who listen to this and they go, what is he talking about? But that's just my opinion. And so I always try to throw in a few punches, so I just get them laughing. Because again, I kind of go, I'm sorry, this is very just deep, dark, and depressing. It's not a big happy ending as most people would hope. But yeah,
Do you offer any special tours?
depending on if the tour falls on the anniversary of an execution, I've gotten very lucky this year. Unfortunately, I missed Bridget's, but because I started literally the next day, unfortunately. But I was there. I've done the July 19th, where on those tours, the highlight is the 5 myths and misconceptions relating to the 5 women who were hanged on July 19th. Then on August 19th, I did the 5 who were hanged on August 19th. And then for September, because there was just so much that went on in September trials of 1692, and there's so much going on that I hope to do a book about it in the future. But I tried to cover myths about the 9, if you include Giles Corey, the 9 who lost their lives in September. Actually, on September 1st, I did a little thing for Mary Parker because it was September 1st, it was the day before her arrest, but I tried to talk about her and just like the whole misidentification possibility of there are like 3 Mary Parkers living in the area and it could have been any one of them. And a lot of people are like, oh, I didn't know that. I'm like, yeah, nobody talks about it. I was like, there's a lot that went on. It's just a lot of really interesting stuff. Unfortunately, it's just nobody talked about it.
You mentioned Bridget is one of your favorite stories to talk about. Is there a common request of another individual that comes up from tour
Hmm.
walkers?
That's a great question. I would honestly, usually sometimes people will ask about Sarah Good. The most popular one so far would honestly have to be Giles Corey because he's the only one that is at the Charter Street Memorial who does not have the label of hanged. It's usually him. However, I always I have one main person that I talk about though, besides Bridget, and it's always Rebecca Nurse. Because I'm obligated because I work at the homestead. And also a lot of people they know her. It's her and John Proctor because of the Crucible, so they know a lot about her, which is good. But unfortunately, most of their misconceptions come from the Crucible, and so I spent that whole time being like, "No, that's not what happened." And but I would have to say Giles Corey. He's the most asked, then Rebecca, then John Proctor, and then I get the question, "What happened to the bodies after burial?" And then usually I talk about George Jacobs because of the whole because he's the only confirmed victim I guess those would have to be who is the most asked.
What's the most challenging thing about leading these tours?
The vocal strain is definitely the hardest. I think I'm not surprised if I will probably go through 5 more bags of lozenges by the end of the season. It's also hard on the body walking for an hour. Walking and talking is very, very tiring, but it's all for a good cause. I love doing it. A quote that I always keep in the back of my mind is something Marilyn Roach said in Six Women of Salem, and also when I had the privilege of meeting her in June. She said, all lives are stories and history is made of stories. And if that's the best way to encapsulate it is the tour. And that's what gets me through it. Because even though I'm very tired by the end of the first tour or the second tour, and I feel like my vocal cords are going to explode, I always think, I'm like, you know what though? Somebody asked me a really good question. And then because I always keep a copy of the Day by Day Chronicle with me at work, and I'll look through it so that way by the next tour, I can answer someone's question if they ask me the same question.
That's good. Is it difficult to keep everyone's focus with all of the modern tourist attractions and the crowds? Because what you're doing is these historic stories, but visually and all of the excitement is surrounding you.
That's a great question. If it's a smaller tour, because we're just starting to pick up a little bit, if it's a smaller tour, I have the ability to keep them focused. I've never really had issues with distraction from anyone else, thankfully. From what I've encountered, the other tour guides are very respectful, but it's definitely my biggest thing though is if there's like the crowds going from where the old town hall is up to that little alleyway crossing Essex Street to go to where Bridget lived. That is the biggest, hardest part because it's trying to get across the freeway. There's so many people going in both directions and trying to take a group of like 2 people is super fine. But when you have a group of 18 people, it's okay, you guys go first. I'll just go to that little alleyway over there and I'll meet you there. That's what I have to say is the hardest is the crowds. Thankfully, that can keep them pretty focused. But once the crowds come in, it's no man's land.
What's the most common question that you get on the tours?
Ooh, that's like opening a can of worms. I'll give you 3. One, the biggest one is, why were they hanged and not burned? The next one is, why was Zhao's corn pressed to death? And then, did they accuse them for their land? Those would have to be the top 3 most asked questions, not even with the tours, but also at the homestead. Always the most top 3 asked questions.
Yeah.
Eh,
How do you answer those?
So for the burning versus hanging, I'd say Catholic continental Europe, because it was a crime against the church and it was heresy, you burned heretics. England, it was a crime against the state, so you hanged them. Giles Corey was pressed because I simplify it to he was a stubborn old man and was not following court procedure. So that was the legal punishment you get for him. And then the third one is the term property has changed since 1692. Back then, property could mean anything as simple as someone's chair, someone's bedding, someone's cattle. Now, when people think property, they think, oh, the land and the house. They couldn't take the land back then unless they wanted to go through a really lengthy court procedure, but they would take their candlesticks and their clothing and their sheep and stuff.
And which thing do you get an argument on? Does anybody argue?
Thankfully, no, not yet. I've been warned that sometimes they are, but usually if I've been told that if there is, someone else will probably say something before I do, but I haven't encountered that yet.
Yeah. I think probably the greatest thing about busting the myths is you have something to bust it with. So
Mhm.
you can't argue with the record.
Exactly. And at the end of the tour, they always go, what do you recommend for reading? I'm like, oh, either the Day by Day Chronicle by Marilyn Roach or Six Women to Say. Those are my top 2 because they're the easiest for me to read. So I would say one of those 2. Like, if you want to argue with me, go read those books. You can't argue with, and
Mm.
because that's where I get a lot of my information from.
How has your understanding of the trials changed, if it has, since you've been a tour guide?
I always thought that when I was first learned about it, I was like, "Oh, okay, it started in January, Salem Village." When I was younger, obviously, the whole thing about the Venus glass was being pushed. I very quickly learned as I got older that's not true. Or also always I think I learned very quickly, people always want an answer and they're not satisfied if they don't get an answer. Because then I'm like, 'cause when I was younger, I'm like, oh, if it wasn't, they didn't learn the quote unquote voodoo from Tituba, then was it because the accusers lived on one side of the village versus the other side? Then obviously that's not true. And then I learned very quickly that it's not just one little thing. It's a bigger picture. And especially like when I learned, I'm like, oh, so it wasn't just people from Salem, you know what I mean? Because then you have people from 50 something people from Andover. You have Mary Bradbury, who lives in Salisbury, Susanna Martin from Amesbury. And then I learned 6 people from Haverhill were accused where I live. And I was like very quickly learning, I'm like, oh, so there's a much bigger picture to this. And so there is not one answer that can be explained why this happened.
Just recently relearned that, and not just about the Salem history. We've been talking about Salem now for a couple of years here on the podcast with experts reading thousands of pages of records and expert explanations. And we're getting ready to travel to England to go to the Witchcraft and Human Rights Conference that's happening at Lancaster University. And
Mhm.
there's some witch trial historic locations where we're going to go and check it out. And I started by expecting the history to be a certain way. And as I'm learning about these places that I'm going to go, it was just like a reminder. It's all these things. It was all these people,
Mhm.
just the perfect storm coming together. And I don't know why we always have to learn that. Sometimes we forget that these stories really are complex and there's not like this one reason.
Mhm. It's like, oh my gosh, even when I learned that, for example, when I learned that Massachusetts wasn't the only colony to have witch trials, and I learned about Connecticut. And then I learned that, oh, 2 women were accused in Pennsylvania. There were people in Maryland who were accused. There were people in Virginia and Grace Sherwood. And I'm like, okay, wow, this is a lot bigger than I thought it would be. And then I remember I was 16 or 17 when I watched A Century of Murder. And it's the documentary about the English witch trials. And that was so eye opening. And you'd see similarities of what was going on with the 1590s witch trials in Scotland, and then the Pendle witch trials, and the Matthew Hopkins kind of like reign of terror, I guess if that's what you want to call it, and how there's similarities to 1692, but then also it's okay. So really, because then also it's like when you look at some of for example, when you have people who confess in Salem, their confessions are a lot more different than those who confessed, for example, in the 1590s in Scotland. The Scottish witches' confessions are much more violent, Disney villain level violent, whereas the ones in Salem, the witch trial in Salem, were more like, oh yeah, I twisted my button every time I thought angrily about someone. Oh, okay. So it's not as bad. And then but the more I learn about the bigger picture, I'm like, oh, there's so much more that I want to learn about this. And unfortunately, there's so much that is missing from the witch trials, not just in Salem, but Connecticut and or pre 1692 cases in Massachusetts. I would love to be able to find the trial record of Margaret Jones. Doesn't mean we're ever going to find it. I think it just adds more fuel to the fire.
We're going to Pendle, and we're
Oh,
going to
amazing.
Newcastle. Go see Newcastle Castle, where they had a major trial, and we've had Katie Ledane on an episode here in the past talking about the Newcastle witch trials. But then we're going to Pendle, which we've heard referred to as the Salem of England. Basically, it's more of the modern image of the witch is a lot of what's woven through the towns in that area. There's a lot of the touristy attraction side of witch trials, the dark tourism side of it.
Yeah.
But we're going to go there and check out the whatever sites we can see of it. We'll go to Lancaster Castle where they were tried. and I'm looking forward to seeing that because, like you said, it's such a big world of witch trials. There's so many to get to.
Yeah, it's first of all, so lucky. It's something I'll love to do someday, but it's just, and then also I think knowing where this stuff happened, like when I was doing research for my book about Sarah Cloyce, I went to these spots where these things happened. Just stand there and just imagine what it was like. You know what I mean? What they would have seen. Unfortunately, Salem has changed so much since 1692. I think if you plopped John Hawthorne in the middle of Salem nowadays, he'd be very confused and also be very offended that there is a witch statue on where his house was. But it's once you, if it's quiet, if you go in March or April and you can stand there and it's quiet, you can get a sense. Or even like going to the Danvers Rail Trail up by the high school where Sarah Cloyce lived. I haven't had the opportunity to get out to Framingham yet to see where her house stood. And now there's the other house that's in the property. But also, though, just traveling the distance, seeing how long it took to get from point A to point B, even by car. I couldn't imagine like having to go from I work at the homestead, but then I've also traveled to Boston. So I'm like, I couldn't imagine being someone in 1692 living in Salem Village or Ipswich or whatever. And it's like, oh, but we're going to put you in the Boston jail. And it's going to take all day to get there. And it's just such a long day. And it really makes you sympathize with them a lot because it's once you understand stuff like that, you go from being at the homestead, oh, this is so beautiful here. And then you go to Boston. And nowadays, you have to go through all the traffic and stuff. But back then, you have to go to like this medieval looking fortress for the jail. It's sad.
You mentioned Sarah Cloyce, that's Rebecca Nurse's sister. What's the name of your book and when can people get that?
The name of my book is Sober and Civil. And then there's the subtitle where it's Being the True Narrative of Sarah Towne Cloyse, formerly Bridges. I got the inspiration because I was looking at one of Cotton Mather's books and he had the title, but then he had a super long subtitle. And I was like, oh, that'd be really cool to do for my book. But it actually will be published on September 9th. So I'm sure well before this episode airs, but it'll be available September 9th, which is actually the 332nd anniversary of the joint petition that Sarah Cloyce and Mary Esty wrote. A lot of people don't know that because they only know about Mary Esty's petition, but Sarah and Mary worked on one. And also, when I was writing my book, I was very careful about not putting the term witch in my title because I don't like doing that because they weren't witches. Again, if people hear my opinion of this and they get angry at me, so be it. It's my opinion. But I looked through the records to see if there were any descriptions of Sarah's personality. And I found one from John Arnold, the jailkeeper in Boston. And he described Sarah and Mary Esty as being in a most sober and civil manner. And I was like, light bulb. I was like, and unfortunately, sometimes titles don't come that easy to a lot of authors, except for when I was going to originally do my first book about Bridget. I've had the title in my mind, back in my mind. I'm not going to say it because it's not copyrighted yet. But once it gets copyrighted, then I can start saying it so no one can take my idea. But yeah,
Yeah.
Congratulations on the project getting published.
thank you. I it's definitely I'm surprised no one ever talked about her. I know Janice Thompson wrote a book about her and I read it and it it opened eyes. And then now I'm like, okay, let me do a biography that way. And there's also Three Sovereigns for Sarah, which is a great movie. Don't get me wrong. But I'm like, but no one knows who she is. It's everyone keeps calling like, oh, there was a third sister that was accused. I'm like, okay, she has a name. It's Sarah. And I even put it in the description of the book. I'm like, she's always referred to as the other sister. And that's why the title is Sarah Cloyce, formerly Town, formerly Bridges.
Mm, yeah, and just because she didn't suffer the same fate as Mary and Rebecca, she was a victim of this injustice, and
Mhm.
she languished in jail for months and months in deplorable conditions.
Yep. And I mean, a big question always being asked is how close were Sarah and her sisters? And to that, I can never say. Even just the distance between Danvers and Topsfield, traveling that distance in the 17th century, it's not a quick trip, but it's also not a super long trip. But they wouldn't have had the time, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And Sarah was 21 years younger than Rebecca. She was closer in age to Mary, but still there was an age gap there. And by the time Sarah was old enough to recollect and be able to form relationships, Mary and Rebecca were off married and having kids of their own. Thankfully, I'm not going to try to spoil too much because I know hopefully we can get an episode once the book's out and I can talk about it more. But thankfully, at least one of the relationships between the sisters, I think was a little more tangible. Another one was questionable. I have a hard time deciphering it, but I don't think they hated each other by any means. They were sisters, and it still is very depressing. I can imagine because I didn't know this is the one thing I will not really spoil because it's out there. It's just people have to look from the records for it. Is Sarah was in the jail when both of her sisters were taken away to their executions. I never knew she was I knew she was there for Mary's. I never knew she was there for Rebecca's. And actually, Rebecca, Mary, and Sarah were all in the jail together when Rebecca went to her execution. And I remember when I was writing it, I was thinking about the scene in Three Sovereigns, where Vanessa Redgrave, narrating of Sarah, basically says, after countless attempts of false hopes and whatnot, she's brought to her execution. And I couldn't imagine having to be there. And it's like you're there and you get back from her trial, and Rebecca's, oh, I was found not guilty. And Sarah's like, great. Or Sarah Mary, like, great. And she's actually, because I couldn't hear them when they asked the question, they changed the verdict. And so now I'm condemned. Or then there's the time when Rebecca got the reprieve, but then the reprieve was revoked. And then she's excommunicated from the Salem town, from the church. You know what I mean? Like, I can imagine having to watch my sister go through all of that. She's taken away from me. Like, I see her. It's sad.
It's sad.
So hard. And Mary Esty also, she got released from jail for a little while, but then
Yeah.
Mercy Lewis complained that she was getting murdered by the specter all of a sudden, and they put her back.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought when I think this was put in my mind by Three Sovereigns because in the movie they are in the jail together the whole time. But then I'm like, oh, it was the 80s. He didn't have the budget to have all these different jails. But Mary, for the first arrest, was after her first arrest, was never with them. She stayed in Salem and they never sent her to the Boston jail. And so I think it's because they were like, oh, we don't think we can bring her to trial yet. And then she's released. And then there's a whole thing again with Mercy Lewis. And obviously, like when we do talk about my book, I'll love to talk about that more. But, and then Mercy accuses her again. And then Mercy accuses all these other people, including my ancestor, the swarm of witches that was led by Mary Esty. One of those witches was my ancestor, apparently, even though I've not found the deposition. But Marilyn writes it, so I'm going to believe it. And and then I couldn't imagine though, you're in the Boston jail in the middle of summer, and then Mary walks in, they're like, "Wait a minute, I thought you were released." And then she's like, "Wow, no."
Yeah. I descend from both Mary and Rebecca.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine. Like, minus my ancestor, I have no connection, but at this point, doing so much with Rebecca, her and her two sisters are very much my honorary aunts.
Yeah.
I remember when I went to go see Marilyn Roach get the Sidney Purley Award a few months ago. I remember her joking about how, like, because she's currently the book she's working on, like, she was trapped in a room with all six of those people. And very much it's so true. When I was writing Sober and Civil, I felt like Sarah and Mary and Rebecca were there, mostly Sarah, because she's like, oh, don't forget that. Don't forget that. And I'm working on my plans for my other books. And one of them being September Trials, I have a house full of 16 people telling me their stories very loud,
Yeah. That get crowded.
a little crowded.
September was, yeah, it was definitely the super busy month for arrests, examinations, trials themselves. Everything was going on at once. It was like the last hurrah
Yep.
before it faded out. They're
Yep.
like, let's get everybody that we can while we can. It,
Exactly.
it's brutal. It was brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've talked about how there's these witch trials in Massachusetts before Salem. One of those Haverhill residents that was accused was John Godfrey, and he's in
Yep.
like 5 times for witchcraft, a couple slander suits, and then he's charged 3 times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so funny. It's like, because before Salem, really kind of hard to get to go to trial. But there's John Godfrey who goes to trial twice, I think. And then also Eunice Cole from Hampton, New Hampshire, arrested 3 times, goes to trial twice, is very nearly found is convicted and almost hanged after her first trial. I'm sure I'm blemishing over a lot of stuff with that regarding that. Still though, there are some cases though before 1692 that are very like give 1692 vibes, you know what I mean? I can imagine like being like Venus Cole and like being arrested multiple times, going to trial multiple times, and each time it's like, ooh, I could die. But then it's, oh, wait a minute, convictions never stick, so maybe I won't. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, there was that whole intense period early on where they did execute 4 women in the early years, but then there's this, like, 32-year gap
Mhm.
between any executions before you get to Goody Glover, which was just a few years before Salem. So, for the most part, before Salem, people were acquitted.
Yeah. And I think really the more I looked into it, I think because Anne Hibben's case was so controversial even back then, like they were kind of like, oh no. And I think that's why they treaded carefully from that point on, which again, I guess you can say does mirror Salem because the governor was realizing, oh, this is unpopular, so be careful. And then he writes his letter to the king and queen, and then he's still waiting for the response, which is really the only reason why he reprieved the 8 people who were supposed to be hanged in February of 1693. Had he just done it, who is to say if more people couldn't have been convicted and hanged because there's a precedent? But because the governor just issuing reprieves, a lot of people were probably like, okay, whatever. I guess this is just, it's over. But I think had maybe Anne Hibben's case not been so controversial, more people could have been persecuted in that 32-year span. Who knows? Who really, I don't think we'll ever know the answer to that.
Mm.
Yeah.
So with all those cases that happen outside of Salem, and then Salem itself on top of that, there's 200 some odd individuals in Massachusetts get accused of witchcraft in the 17th century. And uh, some of them have had their attainders reversed
Mhm.
if they were convicted, but nobody who was convicted in Boston has had that treatment yet.
Yep.
And no one out of the 200 some people has received any kind of official apology. There's only been Ann Putnam Jr. made a little apology. Samuel Sewell said something in church, and the jurors were kind of like, "Oh, we misunderstood this. Our bad." So there hasn't been an apology with any weight. Um,
Yes.
but you've been involved with the Massachusetts Witch Hunt Justice Project from the beginning. Why is that important to you?
It's just, I think, again, I work in education, so I think it's always important to say sorry. It's just you have to mean it and not be like, I'm sorry, the devil made me do it, like Ann Putnam was. And even then, people will think Ann Putnam's apology was for the whole thing. I'm like, no, she apologized for accusing Rebecca and her 2 sisters because she was trying to become a church member, and Rebecca's family would have voted her in. That's really the only reason, because Joseph Green was a smart man and he realized, hey, make sure you cover your bases. And also, it's just, especially when I learned my own ancestor was involved, I'm like, oh, and just no acknowledgement of what happened. And I like, and then so I reached out and I tried to do something. But even on my tour, people ask me, they're like, oh, one of the most, I get another common question I get, I forgot to mention it earlier, but I guess I'll mention it just on the topic is, what has anyone ever apologized? And I always say, I'm like, well, depends on what you define as an apology. And and they're like, oh, have they ever been clear? I'm like, the Salem ones have. And they're like, wait, what do you mean the Salem ones? I'm like, well, there's 5 people hanged in Boston that no one ever talks about. And So if they're particularly interested, they'll chat me up afterwards. But I always talk about that. And I try to be like, I'm like, it wasn't just Salem, but also though, there's ever really been no acknowledgement from the state. And you would think for a state where a lot of popular Hollywood media always perpetuate as a witch, like a flurry of witches living here. If you look at any movie, for example, a show coming on Disney Plus in a few months, Agatha All Along in the Marvel, there's literally in the Marvel universe, there's a group of witches called the Salem Seven or whatever. And I'm like, you would think that Massachusetts would be more receptive of their history. They are regarding the revolution, but when it comes to the witch trials, they're like, oh, that happened here.
Mm,
Yeah, I feel like everyone's really, and this is Sarah Jack's opinion only, everyone's really comfortable with this little box that has the story of Salem in it. It's kind of a mystery, but oh, look, we have some really great records. It's a wild story, but what do we
Mhm.
really know? And then if you start talking about these other people on the bigger picture, there's a lot to face there. And it's opening a much bigger box, but it has to be done. It's
Mhm.
time. There's hundreds of stories. All those names, the 200, they all have names. Their lives and their families were altered from it. And especially the Boston convicted, it's just really time for them to have their names made clear. But it's easier sometimes to just use Salem as an excuse. Well, we've dealt with that. Salem's so big, it's got to be that's got to be that's the history, right? But no, I
Mhm.
mean, it's a big piece of it, but the history is way broader in scope.
Yep. Yep. And it's just people, like I said earlier, people want answers and they want a happy ending. I'm like, but in order to get to that happy ending, you have to look at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
I'm sure if we get the apology and we get everyone cleared, I guess you could say it finally has a happy ending after 400 years. But if that doesn't happen, then technically there is no happy ending. Because again, it's like at work, oh, so and so pushed me. Okay, then they need to say sorry to you. And once they say sorry, everything's all better. And again, once they say sorry for uh, acknowledging it, it I'm sure would make people feel better. You know what I mean?
there are still witch hunts going on in our world, sadly, which is
Mm.
another thing that an apology right now would really help to show that we stand against witch hunting anywhere under any circumstances.
Yep. And you would think again, because witches are just so popular in media, like people would be so much more willing to talk about the American witch trials because people talk about the American witch trials so much more than Europe.
Mm.
I'm like, but they don't. And I'm like, y'all love it so much. Well, why don't you talk about it?
Well,
Yeah,
we're
why
talking
only
about it.
Salem? Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
And
talk about them all.
yeah, and I think these conversations will ripple through. It takes time, but
Hmm.
the signatures on the petition, it's growing. It's almost at
Yep.
2,500. That's really great.
And eventually, and hopefully once this does get passed, maybe the best spot for it to be in the middle, even though it wasn't the execution spot for the Boston condemned, but in the middle of Boston, just have a monument to it. You could have the names of all the people in Massachusetts history who were accused. I'm not saying there has to be a statue of anyone. It'd be really cool though to see like Margaret Jones, Tituba, and maybe Bridget Bishop. You know what I mean? Like first hanged in Massachusetts, the first kind of one of the first accused in Salem, the first hanged in Salem. That's just my opinion though.
I like it.
Yeah,
But I think or just release a wall monument of all of their names that we have documents for. And then again, like it gets people to ask the question, oh, what was this? And then that way their stories will always be told. And something I always stuck with me, the ancient Egyptian belief, and when you remember someone's name, they never truly die or something like that. And that's why it's always like with these, it's if their name lives on, they never truly are gone.
right. That's the least that they deserve is for their names to live on and people to recognize that they were individual people, just like, you know, you and I and Sarah, individual
Mhm.
people. Anybody out there, values their own individuality should realize these people had that too.
Yep.
But I love the idea of getting a wall or somewhere with all their names on it.
Me
Just
too.
some kind of, it could have maybe a statue of one of the people or a stand-in for all of them or whatever, but having the names there for all to read and come see and say these names live on. We're preserving them in stone so their stories never die.
Mm.
So how can people get tickets to your tour?
Either you can come to the visitor center, you will see me and my amazing boss sitting at the desk as soon as you walk in. And if you ask us, do you have any recommendations for historical tours? We will gladly have you purchase them from us, at the front desk. Or if you go online, I think to the Essex Heritage website and you click tours, our tour should show up and you can buy tickets online through Eventbrite. Highly recommend it. I'm not the only one who does it. There is another guide. Either way, it's a great way to learn about the witch trials and everything.
Yeah, I can't wait to come do it myself.
Yep. I'll be more than happy to have you guys.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much for this really delightful conversation. I learned a lot talking to you, and I knew I would. I was really looking forward to getting to do this today.
I'm really happy I had the opportunity to do this.
Thank you, Antonio.
And now Sarah has this week's edition of End Witch Hunts News.
End Witch Hunts news update on the Massachusetts Witch Hunt Justice Project. As many of you know, this project seeks to exonerate all individuals accused of witchcraft in Massachusetts during the 17th century. There is growing support. To learn more about this history and the effort, go to massachusettswitchtrials.org. To join the coalition, visit our Facebook page. Want one of these sharp awareness buttons? Shop our Zazzle.com store. We are actively seeking a champion or team of champions who will prioritize this legislation and ensure it is given the attention it deserves. The exoneration of those accused of witchcraft in Massachusetts is a high priority issue, and it's the general court's civil responsibility to stop diminishing its importance. Notably, 8 individuals convicted of witchcraft in Boston have yet to receive an exoneration, despite the need for justice for all those accused, over 200 in total. We must move past the laser focus that zeroes in on only the notable Salem witch trial stories and acknowledge all the victims of witchcraft accusations across the full colony. Our petition supporting this effort now has nearly 2,500 signatures, and we're continuing to gather more. We need your help. If you believe that justice should be served for these individuals, we encourage you to sign the petition and share it widely. Additionally, we are seeking legislators in Massachusetts who recognize stopping witch hunts as a priority and understand that exonerating the historic individuals accused of witchcraft is a crucial part of that effort. This coalition of volunteers has many of the same volunteers who worked with the Connecticut House Representative Jane Garibay and Senator Saud Anwar to successfully pass H.J. 34, a resolution concerning certain witchcraft convictions in colonial Connecticut. That legislation included all the names of those convicted of witchcraft in Connecticut. Now it's time for Massachusetts to follow suit. This movement reminds us that witch hunting isn't just a dark chapter in history. It's a current global crisis. Around the world, accusations of witchcraft still lead to violence, persecution, and even murder. Exoneration legislation here sends a powerful message that Massachusetts, and by extension the United States, stands firmly against witch hunting in all its forms. For more information on the global crisis of witchcraft accusations, I encourage you to read the recent United Nations report linked in the show description. You can also learn more about how we're working to end witch hunts at endwitchhunts.org. It is all of our responsibility to act, and especially the responsibility of those in power, to take action to ensure that history's wrongs are acknowledged and justice is served for all those falsely accused, in the past and today in the present. Let's make our voices heard, because the voices of the victims must be heard. Those who deserve this justice have called out their own innocence.
Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us for this episode of Witch Hunt.
Join us every week.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.